The new girl. It was the start of a new school year, and with it came the arrival of a new student at Riverside High School. Her name was Tasha Johnson, and she had just transferred from a different state. As she walked through the crowded halls for the first time, her presence immediately caught the attention of everyone around her. She was different, not just in the way she looked, but in the quiet confidence she carried. Tasha's deep brown eyes scanned the hallways, taking in the strange surroundings. Yet she seemed unfazed by the chaos of teenagers rushing to their next class. Her hair was braided into intricate patterns, a small crown of gold beads adorning the ends. She wore a simple white hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers, blending in yet standing out all at once. She didn't smile at anyone, nor did she frown. It was as if she was perfectly content in her own world, a world she would create on her terms. Tasha wasn't the type of person who would easily attract attention, but in a place like Riverside High, where status and cliques ruled, her presence was undeniable. Her first class was history, and as she entered the room, all eyes turned towards her. The teacher, Mrs. Carter, gestured for her to sit in the only empty seat at the back. It was the seat next to a group of popular students, the ones who were known for their sharp tongues and even sharper stares. The group of three looked at her, then back at each other, exchanging knowing glances. Tasha ignored them as she ignored everyone else. She sat down, unpacked her books, and got to work. The whispers started almost immediately, hushed conversations that danced across the room, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes were fixed on her notebook, as if she was already miles away from the noise around her. It didn't take long for the bullies to notice her. There was Sarah, the queen bee of the school, who had mastered the art of making people feel small without ever saying a word. Next to her was Jenna, Sarah's loyal sidekick, who would laugh at anything her friend found amusing, even if it wasn't funny at all. And then there was Matt, the one who tried to be cool by making jokes at others' expense, pretending that his teasing was all in good fun. He had a reputation to maintain and wouldn't let anyone forget it. Tasha didn't seem to care about any of this. She didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their presence. To the bullies, that was the first challenge. They had never met anyone like her before, someone who didn't react to their attempts to get under her skin. By the time lunch came around, the trio had already decided that they would make her their next target. Sarah leaned over to Jenna, whispering something into her ear, and they both laughed. Matt, always ready to take a joke too far, nudged Sarah and gave her a mischievous grin. "Watch this," he said. He stood up and in a loud voice called across the cafeteria, "Hey, new girl, did you get lost on your way to the jungle?" The room fell silent for a split second, but then the laughter erupted. Jenna and Sarah joined in, their voices ringing out like an orchestra of mockery. Tasha, however, didn't flinch. She simply kept eating her lunch, unfazed by the taunts. Matt's eyes widened in disbelief. "What, no comeback? You're just gonna sit there and take it?" he asked, the grin on his face faltering as the silence stretched on. Tasha didn't respond, didn't even look up at him. She continued to eat her sandwich, her gaze steady and unwavering. The bullying didn't stop there. For the next few days, they tried everything. Sarah would whisper loudly enough for Tasha to hear, making sure her words were sharp and cruel. "I bet she can't even spell fashion," she'd say, nudging Jenna with a smirk. "Or maybe she's just too busy pretending to be one of us." Tasha heard it all but never gave them the satisfaction of a reaction. Matt tried to push her buttons further, shoving a tray of food into her hands during lunch, hoping she'd drop it and give him the excuse to laugh. But Tasha didn't drop the tray. She held it steady, her grip firm, her expression still neutral. One afternoon after class, the trio cornered her outside the school gates. "You're not getting away so easily," Matt sneered, his friends flanking him on either side. "You think you're better than us just because you keep to yourself, huh?" Sarah crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes. "Well, guess what? You're not. You're nothing special. Just another freak who doesn't know her place." Tasha didn't move. She stood tall, staring directly at them with the same calm expression she always wore. It was clear that she wasn't afraid of them, which only seemed to make them angrier. Jenna smirked. "What's the matter? Too good to speak to us?" she asked. Tasha, without saying a word, stepped forward, her gaze never wavering. The air between them seemed to hum with a tension that was almost palpable. The trio didn't know it yet, but they had picked the wrong person to mess with. Tasha wasn't just the new girl. She wasn't just a quiet teenager trying to get through high school without drawing attention. She had a past, one she had kept hidden from everyone. A past that had taught her to survive when everything else fell apart. The people who thought they could bully her had no idea what she was capable of. As they continued to taunt her, a flicker of recognition crossed her eyes. She had been through worse, had fought harder battles and come out stronger every time. She wasn't going to let a group of high school bullies dictate her story. Slowly, without a word, she turned and walked away from them. She didn't need to prove anything to them, and she wasn't about to let them drag her down. But they didn't stop. They followed her, their words becoming louder, more cutting. "Where are you going, freak? Afraid of a little challenge?" But Tasha didn't look back. She kept walking, knowing that the real challenge would come when they finally realized who they had underestimated. The first encounter. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and side glances. Tasha continued to walk through the hallways of Riverside High like a shadow, moving with an unshakable confidence that only seemed to fuel the curiosity and disdain of those around her. The bullies, particularly Sarah, Matt, and Jenna, weren't ones to give up easily. They had tasted the challenge she presented, and despite the initial shock, they weren't going to back down. To them, Tasha was an enigma, a puzzle they couldn't solve, and that bothered them more than anything. They prided themselves on being the center of attention, the ones who ruled the school with their sharp tongues and popular status. It was their game, and anyone who didn't follow the rules needed to be put in their place. And Tasha was most certainly not following the rules. It started with Sarah, who, unable to tolerate Tasha's indifference any longer, decided to try a different tactic. One morning, she approached her as Tasha sat alone in the courtyard reading a book. Sarah stood over her, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. Tasha didn't flinch, didn't look up from her book. She simply turned a page, unfazed by Sarah's words. "You think you're too good to talk to anyone, that you're above it all?" Sarah continued, her tone growing more insistent. "Well, guess what? You're not. You're just another new girl trying to fit in." Still, Tasha said nothing. She kept reading, her expression calm and unreadable. Sarah's patience was wearing thin. "You think you're so cool, don't you? Hiding behind that book like it makes you special." For a moment, the silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Sarah waited for a reaction, for something, anything to break the stillness. But Tasha didn't respond. And that's when Sarah snapped. She reached down and slammed the book shut, startling Tasha for the first time since she'd arrived at Riverside. The sound of the book hitting the table echoed in the air, but Tasha's face remained calm, unreadable. "What's the matter, Tasha?" Sarah sneered. "Scared of a little attention?" Tasha stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply looked Sarah in the eye, as if daring her to do something more. The challenge in Tasha's gaze was unmistakable. Sarah, for the first time, hesitated. She had expected fear, anger, maybe even tears, but Tasha gave her none of that. Instead, Sarah found herself faced with a quiet strength she couldn't understand. The more she tried to provoke Tasha, the more she realized that her words had no effect. And that scared her. Without saying another word, Tasha picked up her book and walked away. The courtyard was filled with the murmurs of students who had watched the encounter, but Tasha didn't care. She didn't need their validation. Sarah, on the other hand, stood there, seething with frustration. How dare Tasha ignore her like that? It was a direct challenge, a challenge Sarah wasn't about to lose. That afternoon, the tension in the air was palpable. The group of bullies, Sarah, Matt, and Jenna, decided it was time to escalate things. They had failed to break Tasha with their usual methods, so they needed something stronger, something more personal. They watched Tasha closely as she made her way to the gym for PE. She walked with the same steady, purposeful pace as if she had a destination in mind and nothing in the world could distract her from it. Matt, never one to pass up an opportunity to make someone uncomfortable, leaned over to Sarah. "I think it's time we teach her a lesson," he whispered, his voice full of malice. "She thinks she's better than us? Let's show her she's not." Sarah smiled, a twisted, calculating smile that made Jenna laugh nervously. "I'm in," she said. "Let's see how tough she really is." The plan was simple. Isolate her, humiliate her, make her regret ever thinking she could walk through the halls without acknowledging them. So as Tasha entered the gym, Matt and Jenna quickly circled around her, blocking her from reaching the locker rooms. You think you can just waltz in here pretending like you don't care about us? Matt taunted. You're just like all the other losers who think they're too cool to talk to anyone. You're nothing, Tasha. Tasha stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The atmosphere around her was charged with the energy of students who knew a confrontation was brewing. Sarah stood back, watching with a satisfied grin. She had her revenge in mind, and she was going to make sure Tasha understood who was in charge. Come on, Jenna added, her voice mocking. Why don't you say something? Or is that all you got? Just walking away like some coward? For a moment, it seemed like Tasha might just turn and walk away again, leaving them to stew in their own bitterness. But then something shifted. The tension in her body was palpable, her shoulders stiffening just enough for the bullies to notice. She looked at them one by one as if she was sizing them up, and then, without warning, she spoke. I'm not afraid of you, Tasha said, her voice calm and steady. But you should be afraid of me. Sarah, Matt, and Jenna all laughed at the audacity of her words. They had expected her to shrink, to beg for mercy, but instead she was giving them the most dangerous thing she could. Confidence. You think you can intimidate me? Sarah spat. You think you can just stand there and talk to me like that? Tasha didn't answer. She didn't need to. As Sarah took a step forward, Tasha's eyes flashed with something fierce, something dangerous. She was done playing their game. Matt moved to shove her, thinking he could intimidate her like he had done to so many others. But as soon as his hand touched her arm, everything changed. Tasha moved with the precision and speed of someone who had been trained. She twisted his arm, flipping him onto the ground with a move so fast and so smooth that it left the entire gym in stunned silence. Matt lay there, gasping, looking up at her in disbelief. Tasha stood over him, her expression unreadable, her calm demeanor now an unsettling force that left everyone around her speechless. I told you, she said softly, her words cutting through the silence. You picked the wrong person. The bullies, shocked by her strength and skill, could only stare as Tasha walked away, leaving them lying in the gym, defeated and humiliated. As the whispers of Tasha's incredible strength spread through the school, people began to realize that the quiet girl they had all underestimated was not someone to be messed with. The tension in the air grew thicker, and the bullies who had once ruled the halls of Riverside High found themselves questioning the power dynamics they had so carefully maintained. But for Tasha, it was just another day. The first encounter had been made, and now she knew the real battle had just begun. The challenge, the news of Tasha's unexpected display of strength, spread quickly through Riverside High. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into rumors, and before the day was over, everyone knew about the incident in the gym. Tasha had become a legend in a matter of hours, but not for the reasons she might have expected. To the students, she was no longer just the new girl. She was the girl who had taken down Matt in a single move, who had silenced Sarah's sharp tongue with nothing more than a cold, steady gaze. To the bullies, Tasha was now the one thing they couldn't understand, the one thing they couldn't control. And that terrified them. Sarah, Matt, and Jenna could hardly believe what had happened. Matt, who had always prided himself on being the tough guy in school, had been humiliated in front of everyone. The words he had used to put others down, the taunts he had thrown at people to feel powerful, had fallen flat against someone who wasn't intimidated by him. Jenna, who had never questioned Sarah's authority, found herself looking at Tasha with a mixture of awe and fear. She had never seen someone stand up to Sarah like that. And Sarah, the queen bee of the school, had never been more rattled in her life. Tasha had broken the unspoken rule of high school, never challenged the status quo. But Tasha had done just that, and now the balance of power had shifted. It wasn't long before Sarah decided that the only way to reclaim control was to take the fight to the next level. She couldn't let Tasha get away with making her look weak, not in front of the entire school. No one made Sarah look weak and got away with it. If Tasha wanted to play the game, then Sarah would make sure she understood the rules. Sarah wasn't going to back down. She never did. The next day at lunch, Sarah found Tasha sitting alone at her usual spot in the courtyard. She had been hoping for a moment like this, a chance to confront Tasha face to face, to prove once and for all who was in charge. This time there would be no silence. There would be no calm indifference. This time Sarah would make her feel the weight of her words. As Sarah walked over, she could see the other students watching from a distance, curious to see what would happen next. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation. This wasn't just another confrontation. This was going to be the one that defined everything. Sarah smiled, a cold, calculating smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, 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 she said, standing just a few feet away from Tasha, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Looks like someone thinks they can just walk around here like they own the place. You think you can make a fool of Matt and still be left alone? Tasha didn't look up from her lunch. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was coming. I didn't make a fool of anyone, she replied, her voice calm but firm. Matt brought that on himself. And if you think I'm going to apologize, you're mistaken. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. She wasn't going to let Tasha walk away from this one. You think you're so tough, don't you? You think you can just push people around, show off your little martial arts moves, and everyone's supposed to bow down to you? Well, guess what? That's not how things work around here. Sarah took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. You don't belong here, Tasha. You're not like us. You don't get to just come in and act like you can take over. Tasha set her lunch down slowly and finally looked up at Sarah. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. I'm not here to take over anything, she said, her tone as sharp as steel. I'm here because I have a right to be. If you have a problem with that, maybe it's your problem, not mine. Sarah's jaw tightened. You really think you can talk to me like that? Do you have any idea who I am? She hissed, her voice rising with each word. I run this school, Tasha. You're just a new girl who got lucky. Don't think for a second that I won't put you back in your place. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happens when you try to challenge me. Tasha stood up, her posture tall and unwavering. She wasn't scared. In fact, there was something in her eyes now. A flicker of something deeper, something more dangerous. Go ahead, she said softly. But you might want to think twice before you push me any further. Because if you want to fight, Sarah, I'll give you one. Sarah took a step back, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected Tasha to stand up to her so directly. But this wasn't just about a fight. This was about control. This was about power. Sarah wasn't about to let Tasha take that from her. Fine, Sarah spat, her voice laced with venom. You want to fight? You've got it, tomorrow after school. No more games. Tasha didn't hesitate. She didn't need to. Tomorrow, she agreed, her voice calm but with an edge of finality. I'll be there. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and the two girls parted ways. But the atmosphere had shifted. No one knew exactly what would happen tomorrow, but one thing was clear. This was no longer just a schoolyard conflict. This was the beginning of something bigger. And as the students filed out of the courtyard, they couldn't help but talk about what had just transpired. Tasha wasn't just the new girl anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, and Sarah had just made the biggest mistake of her life by underestimating her. As Tasha walked to her next class, she felt the weight of the upcoming fight pressing down on her. But there was no fear, no doubt. She had faced worse in her life. She had fought harder battles and come out stronger each time. This wasn't about proving anything to Sarah or to anyone else. This was about standing her ground. She wasn't going to let anyone push her around. Not now, not ever. Unleashing the fighter. The morning of the showdown arrived, and there was a charged atmosphere at Riverside High. The whispers that had spread since yesterday only seemed to grow louder. Everyone was talking about Tasha and Sarah's confrontation after school. It was no longer just a school rumor. It was a spectacle in the making. The entire student body seemed to be waiting with bated breath for what was about to happen. Would Tasha prove herself once again? Or would Sarah crush her with the weight of her reputation? The tension was thick, a palpable energy that lingered in every hallway, every corner of the school. Tasha, however, seemed unaffected by the buzz. She walked through the halls with the same unbothered demeanor she always had, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. To her, this was just another test. It wasn't about popularity. It wasn't about proving a point to anyone. It was about standing up for herself and making sure no one ever thought they could intimidate her again. The bullying had escalated, yes, but she had dealt with worse before. In her eyes, this was just another fight to survive, another challenge to overcome. She spent the day in class like any other, her focus unbroken as she took notes and listened to lectures. The clock ticked by slowly, but she didn't rush. There was no need to hurry. She had all the time she needed. The fight wasn't going anywhere. She didn't feel the anxiety that was spreading among the students. She wasn't nervous. It was just another fight to her, another challenge to prove her strength. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, a group of students gathered near the back exit, their eyes flickering between the doors in the courtyard outside. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Sarah had made her presence known, standing just outside the gate with a small group of her followers. She wasn't going to let Tasha get away with her disrespect. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about showing who really controlled the school. She was determined to make Tasha regret ever crossing her. Tasha, meanwhile, had already made her way out of the school, walking with the same steady, unwavering pace. She wasn't looking for a crowd. She wasn't looking for applause. She wasn't even looking for a fight. She was looking for closure. As she reached the gate, she saw Sarah standing there, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. Behind her, Matt and Jenna were standing off to the side, watching with intense interest. Tasha didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. This was between her and Sarah. "You came," Sarah said, her voice dripping with mock amusement. "I wasn't sure you'd have the guts to actually show up. But then again, you've got a lot of nerve, don't you? You think you can just walk around here like you're better than everyone else? That's not how things work. You don't belong here, Tasha." Tasha looked at her, her expression neutral. "I belong wherever I choose to stand," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm standing here because you decided to make this about you. But I don't play your games, Sarah. This isn't about being better than anyone. It's about standing up for myself." Sarah scoffed, stepping closer to Tasha. "You think you can stand up to me?" She spat, her voice sharp. "You're nothing. Just a scared little girl pretending to be tough. Well, I'll show you just how tough you really are. You've made a mistake, Tasha. You're going to regret it." Tasha didn't back down. She stood there, her posture tall, her gaze steady. "I'm not scared of you," she said, her voice calm but with an undeniable edge. "And I'm not here to fight you, Sarah. I'm here because you pushed me to the edge. And now I'm going to show you that I'm not someone you can walk all over. Not anymore." The students around them started to gather in a loose circle, their eyes wide with curiosity. This was going to be something different. No one had ever seen Sarah challenged like this. They had seen her fight before, seen her tear down others with ease, but Tasha was different. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't scared. And that alone made her a force to be reckoned with. Sarah's eyes flickered with a flash of anger. "You're making a big mistake," she said, her voice low and threatening. "But fine, if you want to fight, you've got one." She lunged forward, aiming to shove Tasha back with all her strength. But Tasha was already moving, her body shifting with the grace of someone who had spent years honing their reflexes. In a fluid motion, she sidestepped Sarah's attack, using her own momentum against her. Sarah stumbled forward, catching herself just before falling, but it was enough. Tasha didn't give her a chance to recover. Before Sarah could regain her balance, Tasha grabbed her wrist, twisting it with a swift, controlled movement. Sarah cried out in pain, but Tasha didn't let go. She didn't want to hurt her. She didn't want to be the villain in this story. She just wanted to show Sarah that she wasn't someone to be messed with. With one final twist, Tasha released Sarah's wrist, pushing her back lightly, making sure she landed on her feet but with no room to retaliate. The crowd around them gasped. No one had expected this. No one had expected Tasha to be so quick, so precise, so effortless. Sarah, the girl who had ruled this school with her sharp tongue and domineering presence, was now standing there breathless, trying to regain her composure. "You're not the only one who can fight," Tasha said, her voice calm, almost detached. "And I'm not the one who started this. You pushed me into it." Sarah glared at her, rubbing her wrist where Tasha had twisted it. "You think this is over?" She spat, her voice filled with venom. "You've made a mistake, Tasha. I'm not done with you." "Not by a long shot." Tasha raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She wasn't interested in Sarah's empty threats. She wasn't interested in playing this game any longer. She had made her point. She had stood up for herself and now she was done. "Good luck with that," Tasha said, her voice cool. "But I'm done here." With that, she turned and walked away, her steps steady and purposeful. As she left the crowd behind her, she could hear the murmurs, the whispers of students who were still processing what had just happened. Sarah stood there, seething with frustration. But she couldn't do anything to change the outcome. Tasha didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She had already proven enough. The consequences, the day after Tasha's showdown with Sarah, felt different. The school buzzed with a new energy, a mix of excitement, confusion, and awe. It wasn't just the fight that had everyone talking. It was the aftermath. the realization that the rules of power at Riverside High had shifted. Sarah, once the undisputed queen bee, had been humiliated in front of everyone. The fight in the courtyard was no longer just another schoolyard drama. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that no one, not even Sarah herself, had anticipated. The hierarchy that had been in place for years had been challenged, and Tasha had come out on top. But the consequences of Tasha's actions were far from over. For Sarah, the humiliation of being bested by someone she considered beneath her wasn't something she was willing to let go. She wasn't the type of person who backed down, who let someone else take her place at the top. This wasn't just about pride anymore. This was about control. It was about power. And Sarah would do anything to reclaim what she believed was hers. The whispers continued to spread throughout the school, but they were no longer just about the fight. Now the students began to wonder what would happen next. Would Tasha's victory be short-lived? Would Sarah find a way to exact her revenge? There was a palpable sense of tension in the air, a feeling that something bigger was coming. It wasn't just about Sarah and Tasha anymore. It was about a clash of wills, a battle for supremacy in a world where power and reputation meant everything. As Tasha walked through the hallways the next day, she could feel the eyes on her, the stares that followed her every step, but there was no fear, no hesitation in her stride. She wasn't worried about the rumors or the whispers. She had nothing to prove to anyone. She had already proven enough. The bullies who had once tormented her were now watching from a distance, and for the first time it wasn't out of malice or mockery. They were watching because they were in awe of her strength, her ability to stand up to the ones who had always been in control. But even as she walked with this newfound sense of power, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more waiting for her. The quiet, confident girl who had walked into Riverside High a few weeks ago was no longer the same person. She had learned to stand up for herself, to defend her place in this world. But she also knew that doing so came with a price. There would always be consequences for challenging the status quo. There would always be people who would try to tear you down to maintain their control. And Sarah, Tasha realized, wasn't the type of person who would just let things go. She wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. After school, Tasha made her way to the bus stop, her thoughts clouded by the weight of what had just happened. She had faced bullies before, but this was different. This was a battle of wills, and she knew Sarah wouldn't stop until she had won. She wasn't sure what Sarah would do next, but she knew that it wouldn't be pretty. Just as she was about to step onto the bus, she heard her name called out. She turned to see Matt walking toward her, a smug expression on his face. He hadn't been part of the fight, but he had made it clear where his loyalties lay. He had sided with Sarah, and now it seemed he was coming to deliver some kind of message. "You really think you can just walk away from what happened yesterday?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You embarrassed Sarah in front of everyone. She doesn't take that kind of thing lightly, you know." Tasha didn't flinch, didn't let the anger that bubbled up inside her show. She had known this was coming. "I'm not worried about Sarah," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm not worried about you either, Matt. If you're here to make threats, you're wasting your time." Matt's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to her, trying to intimidate her with his presence. "You think it's over?" he asked. "You think you've won just because you threw a couple of punches? Sarah won't let this slide. You've made an enemy out of her, and that's something you can't undo. She'll make sure you regret it." Tasha stared at him, her gaze steady. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of Sarah either. She had faced worse challenges in her life, and she had always come out on top. But she knew Matt wasn't just talking for himself. He was speaking for Sarah, and the truth was he was right about one thing. This wasn't over. Sarah wouldn't rest until she had reclaimed her position, until she had proven that no one could cross her without consequences. "I've never been afraid of people like you," Tasha said, her voice cool but filled with a quiet strength. "And I'm not going to start now. You can't control me, and neither can Sarah. If she wants to fight, then let her come. But I'm not going to sit around waiting for her to strike. I've got a life to live," Matt scoffed, clearly unimpressed by her words. "You think you can just ignore her? You think you can just walk away from this?" he sneered. "Sarah doesn't forget, Tasha, and you'll find out exactly what happens when you mess with her. You'll wish you had stayed out of her way." With that, he turned and walked off, leaving Tasha standing there, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But Tasha didn't let them sink in. She had heard it all before. People had always tried to control her, tried to make her feel small, tried to break her. But she had always come through stronger, more determined. She wasn't about to let Sarah or anyone else take that away from her. As Tasha climbed onto the bus and took her seat, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had taken a step into a world she wasn't entirely sure she was ready for. The fight was far from over, and now she knew the real test was about to begin. Sarah wouldn't back down. She wouldn't give up until she had reasserted her dominance, and Tasha was going to have to face her head-on whether she was ready or not. But as the bus pulled away from the school, Tasha felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of calm. She had faced down bullies, threats, and challenges before, and she had always come out on top. She wasn't going to let Sarah or anyone else take that from her. The fight was coming, and Tasha was ready for it. She had nothing left to prove, but everything to fight for. A shocking revelation. The days after the confrontation with Matt were filled with an eerie stillness that hung over Riverside High, like a storm waiting to break. Tasha had been expecting retaliation from Sarah, but what she hadn't anticipated was how much the tension was beginning to build not just within Sarah, but across the entire school. The whispers had intensified, but it wasn't just about the fight anymore. The students were watching, waiting for the next move, wondering how far Sarah would go to reclaim control. Tasha, for her part, kept to herself as she always had, but she could feel the eyes of the school on her. She didn't let it bother her. She had already faced worse, and no amount of gossip or speculation was going to change who she was. One afternoon, as Tasha was walking to her locker after class, she found herself in the hallway alone, the usual rush of students having dissipated. As she reached for her locker, a voice broke the silence. "I need to talk to you." Tasha turned to see Sarah standing there, her arms crossed, her posture tense. There was no hint of the usual mocking smile, no smugness in her eyes. Instead, there was something else, something more serious. Tasha didn't say anything, merely raising an eyebrow in curiosity. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, her voice softer than it had been in their previous encounters. "I didn't come here to fight, Tasha," she said, the words feeling foreign coming from her. "I came because I need to explain something. Something you don't know." Tasha stood still, her gaze steady, but she didn't move closer. She wasn't about to let her guard down, not yet. "I'm listening," she said simply, though her tone was skeptical. Sarah looked around, almost as if she were checking to make sure no one was listening. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to a near whisper. "You don't understand, do you? What this school really is, what this fight is really about. It's not about pride, not about being the top dog. It's about survival. You think you're challenging me, but you're not just challenging me. You're challenging everything." Tasha frowned, still unsure of what Sarah was getting at. "Survival," she echoed, her voice laced with confusion. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly as though a weight she had carried for too long was finally starting to show. "I didn't start all of this, you know. I didn't start being the one everyone looked to, the one who was in control. It wasn't by choice. It's just the way things are. At least it used to be. But everything is changing now, and it's not just because of you." Tasha's interest piqued. She stepped closer, her mind racing with questions. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" she asked, her voice more urgent now. "What do you mean it used to be?" Sarah took another hesitant step forward, as if deciding how much to reveal. Her gaze faltered, and for the first time she seemed vulnerable, human. "You don't know the whole story," she said, her voice quieter now, almost apologetic. "You don't know what I've had to do to keep this position. How far I've had to go to make sure I stay at the top. You think I'm just a bully, right? But that's not it." "Not really." Tasha was silent, but her mind was racing. This was not the Sarah she had expected. She had assumed the confrontation was simply about power, about Sarah's pride and position in the school. But this was something deeper, something that hinted at far more than high school politics. "How much of this is about you, and how much of it is about the bigger picture?" Tasha asked, her voice steady but with an edge of curiosity. She had to know more. Sarah looked at her, a dark shadow crossing her face. "It's all connected," she said, her words coming out slowly. "You see, this school, this place, isn't just a random collection of kids who happen to be here. It's a system, one that's been in place for years. A system where the strong rise to the top and the weak get crushed. It's how it's always been, and I didn't make those rules. But I had to survive in them. I had to make sure I didn't become one of those who gets crushed. Tasha's brow furrowed. So you turned into a bully because you were scared of being weak? She asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and understanding. Sarah nodded, her eyes distant. That's exactly it. I wasn't always this way. I used to be just like you, the quiet girl who kept to herself. But then one day I realized that no one cared about the quiet girls. They cared about the ones who stood out, the ones who commanded attention. I made a choice that day, Tasha. I decided that if I wanted to survive, I had to become someone else. And I did. I became the person you see now. But it's not what I wanted. It's what I had to do. Tasha's mind spun as she processed Sarah's words. She had always assumed that Sarah's arrogance was a result of her natural confidence, her desire to dominate. But now it seemed there was more to it. Sarah's need for control, her harsh words and actions were all born from fear, from a place of weakness. But that doesn't explain why you went after me, Tasha said, still confused. Why go after me when I've barely even spoken to you? Sarah's gaze met hers, and for the first time Tasha saw something like guilt in her eyes. You didn't get it, did you? She said, her voice almost a whisper. You're everything I used to be, quiet, strong in your own way, but not showing it. And that scared me, because if you keep being yourself, if you keep standing up like you did yesterday, you're going to take my place, and I can't let that happen. Tasha was silent for a long moment, taking in everything Sarah had said. She had always seen Sarah as the enemy, the bully, the one who used her power to make others feel small. But now, in this moment, she saw something else. She saw someone who had been broken, someone who had chosen the wrong path out of fear, someone who had built her world on a shaky foundation of power and manipulation. Tasha exhaled slowly, her voice calm but firm. You don't have to be afraid of me, Sarah. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm just trying to stand up for myself, for who I am. You don't have to destroy others to keep yourself from falling. You can change too. For a moment there was silence between them. Sarah didn't respond, her eyes searching Tasha's face as if trying to understand her. But then, without saying anything else, Sarah turned and walked away, leaving Tasha standing there, her mind reeling from the unexpected revelation. It wasn't over. This fight wasn't just about Sarah and Tasha anymore. It was about the system that had forced Sarah into a corner, the system that had made her the person she had become. And Tasha realized with a heavy heart that the real battle wasn't just with Sarah. It was with the world they both had to navigate, a world that demanded power over everything else, the final stand and legacy. The following days after Sarah's revelation were filled with a quiet intensity. Tasha could feel it in the air, a weight that hung over the school like everyone was waiting for something to happen. There was no turning back now. What had started as a simple challenge had grown into something far bigger, something that no one at Riverside High could ignore anymore. Tasha had learned that she wasn't just fighting Sarah. She wasn't just fighting the bullies who had tried to break her. She was fighting a system, a way of thinking that had been in place for as long as anyone could remember, and she wasn't going to stop until that system was challenged, until it was broken down. She hadn't expected Sarah to come to her with such honesty, to admit that her actions had been driven by fear. But even after Sarah's confession, the tension didn't ease. It only seemed to build. Tasha knew that Sarah, despite the vulnerability she had shown, wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to suddenly turn into a different person overnight. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And Tasha was ready for it. As the days passed, Tasha kept her head down, focusing on her studies and keeping to herself. But she could feel Sarah's presence in the halls, in the classrooms, in the whispers that followed her every move. The stairs were no longer filled with mockery. Now they were filled with something else, something more intense. Fear, awe, respect. Tasha had become the symbol of defiance at Riverside High. She had stood up to the queen bee, and she had won, but she knew that victory wasn't permanent. She knew that Sarah wouldn't let this go. She couldn't, not now. And so Tasha steeled herself for what was to come. She had already proven herself in the eyes of her peers, but now she had to prove it to herself. She had to face Sarah one last time, and this time it would be different. No more games. No more words. It would come down to one final confrontation. It was after school, just like the last time. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the empty schoolyard. The air was thick with tension as Tasha walked toward the courtyard, where Sarah had promised to meet her. There were no more words to exchange, no more taunts or challenges. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about legacy. Sarah had built her reputation on power and control, but Tasha had something different. She had strength. She had resilience. And she had something that Sarah could never take from her, the knowledge that she didn't need to tear others down to rise up. As she stepped into the courtyard, she saw Sarah standing in the center, waiting. This time there was no bravado in Sarah's stance, no arrogance in her posture. She stood there like a woman on the edge, waiting for the inevitable. Sarah looked up as Tasha approached, her eyes searching Tasha's face. For the first time, Tasha saw something other than anger in Sarah's gaze. She saw exhaustion, fear, a deep, unsettling sadness. Tasha didn't say anything. She simply stood there, facing Sarah, her gaze unwavering. The fight wasn't about words anymore. It was about proving who had the strength to endure, who had the courage to stand their ground. Sarah took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging slightly, but her eyes remained locked on Tasha's. "You've made your point," Sarah said quietly, her voice laced with a mixture of resignation and defeat. "You're not like the others. You're not afraid of me, and that's what scares me the most." Tasha stood silently, waiting. She wasn't interested in Sarah's words. She wasn't interested in apologies. She just wanted to end this once and for all. "You don't have to keep fighting," Tasha said, her voice calm but with an undeniable strength. "You don't have to keep pretending to be something you're not. This school, this system doesn't have to control you. You can be more than what you've become." Sarah's gaze faltered for a moment, and for the first time Tasha saw the cracks in the facade that Sarah had built around herself. "I don't know how to stop," Sarah whispered. "I don't know how to let go of everything I've built. It's all I've ever known. It's all I've ever been." Tasha took a step closer, her voice steady. "Then let me show you. Let me show you that you don't have to fight for control. You don't have to fight for respect. You can just be who you are without tearing others down. You can find strength in something other than fear." For a long moment, Sarah didn't speak. She simply stood there, her eyes filled with something that resembled doubt, but also a glimmer of something else. Hope. It was a strange, fleeting look, but Tasha saw it. She saw that Sarah was beginning to understand. The fight wasn't about who was stronger. It was about who had the strength to change. And then, without another word, Sarah stepped back. "I can't change overnight," she said softly. "But I'm willing to try." Tasha nodded, her eyes softening. "That's all any of us can do," she said. "Just try." For a moment there was silence between them, a silence that was no longer filled with animosity. For the first time, it felt like both of them were standing on the same ground, no longer opponents but two people who had been forced to grow, forced to face the truth about themselves and the world they lived in. The crowd of students, who had been watching from a distance, began to disperse slowly, realizing that the fight they had all been waiting for was over. No one had expected it to end this way. They had expected blood, a final showdown where one person would walk away victorious, leaving the other broken and defeated. But instead, they saw two people, both changed, both realizing that there was more to life than power and control. Tasha turned and began to walk away, her steps slow but steady. She had made her point. She had shown Sarah and the rest of the school that there was a different way. A way built on strength, not fear. And as she walked into the distance, she knew that she had left a legacy. Not one of dominance or victory, but one of resilience, of standing up for who you are no matter the cost. And as for Sarah, she would have her own journey to take. But for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She felt something lighter, something freeing. She didn't have to be afraid anymore. And that, in the end, was her true victory. Tasha stood at the edge of the school grounds, her heart racing but at peace for the first time in weeks. She had come into Riverside High as an outsider, a quiet new girl who never sought attention or confrontation. But now, after everything that had happened, she realized she had become something more than that. She wasn't just the girl who had stood up to Sarah or the one who had fought back against bullies. She was the girl who had taken control of her own destiny, who had stood firm when the world around her tried to push her down. She had found her strength not in power or domination, but in resilience, in the quiet courage to be herself no matter the consequences. The school that had once seemed like a prison of rules and cliques now felt different. The walls that had once felt so constricting were no longer as high. The people she had once feared, the ones who had tried to break her, now looked at her differently. There was no longer disdain in their eyes, no longer mockery in their whispers. There was respect. She had earned it not through force but through the raw, undeniable truth of her character. As she walked away from the school, she felt lighter, as though a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had finally been lifted. There would always be struggles. There would always be people who tried to tear others down to make themselves feel stronger. But Tasha had learned something important. She had learned that true strength came from standing tall, not in making others fall. True strength came from standing in your truth no matter how much the world tried to make you shrink. She hadn't just won a battle with Sarah. She had won a battle with herself. She had proved to herself that she didn't need to become someone else to survive. She didn't need to tear people down or play by the rules of a broken system. She had built her own path, her own legacy, one where strength wasn't measured by how much you could dominate, but by how much you could endure without losing yourself. And as she stepped out of the school gates, Tasha knew that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead was unknown, but it no longer felt daunting. It felt like a chance to be free, a chance to show the world that no matter where you started or what people expected of you, you could carve your own place in it. And she was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength to face it, because she had already faced the hardest fight of all, the fight to stay true to herself. The end.